For our next assignment, we will be working on an architectural drawing project. For this assignment, you will find a photograph and then use tools in Photoshop to recreate a drawing of it. So let's get started. Using a stock website like Pexels is a great way to find a high-quality image that also falls under the Creative Commons license. These are professional photographs that the artist allows you to use. Once you find a photograph you'd like, you can even look at the information below and make sure that it is free to use and there's no attribution required. When you go to save this photograph to your Google Drive, please do not click on the photograph itself. This is a thumbnail of the photograph. It is much smaller and does not have as much digital information. Instead of clicking on the photograph, what we want to do is click the green free download button at the top. It will automatically save to your Google Drive if you are working on your Chromebook. If you are working on a desktop or another computer, it will save to your downloads. Once you have logged in to Photoshop, we are going to create a new canvas to work on. At the top, we will click File, New. We will select the print option at the very top row of this new window. We will be using letter size paper, and you're going to retitle this with your last name, underscore, and the project. For the orientation, think about which would look better for your photograph. If you remember mine, it's a portrait orientation, so I'm going to keep that as is, but if yours is a landscape, please select this second option. Once we have that corrected for our photograph, we will click Create. The next thing we are going to do is open the photograph we saved and bring it into the canvas we are working on. On the top menu, select File and Open. Make sure you have selected your Google Drive or your downloads if you saved it there. You will want to find the photograph that you just saved from Pexels or another source. If you did use Pexels, it will always put the website's name in front, so that's an easy way to find it in your Google Drive if you forgot to put it in your digital art folder. I'm going to click on the photograph I would like and click Open. You'll notice now that it opened up in a new tab. We now need to take this photograph and put it onto our canvas. In order to do that, we need to be able to see both canvases at the same time. Just like when you're working in Chrome, these little tabs you are able to move around and organize in different ways. So I'm going to click on the tab with my photograph and drag until it's just slightly below, and I am going to drop it. What this does, it shows me both tabs at the same time. From the Layers menu, I'm going to pull the background of my photograph and drop it onto my canvas. You'll see already it has shown up there. I now can close the photograph window. You do not need to save it unless you made changes to it. It's perfectly fine if you just click the close button and you don't have to save it again. Now this looks a little bit strange because my photograph is much larger than my canvas itself, and it's a little bit off center. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reposition it so that it fills as much of the page as possible. In order to do that, at the top I will click File, Free Transform. This has created a box around my piece. It's a little bit hard to see since my photograph is so big. So let's take the magnifying glass and let's zoom out. Up at the top here, you can see there's a plus and a minus magnifying glass. I'm going to switch to the zoom out option so I can zoom out on my photograph. You can see that I no longer have my free transform tool, so I'm going to go back and reselect that. Again, that was Edit, Free Transform. Now we can much better see how big our photograph actually is compared to our canvas itself. We are going to resize this photograph to fit the canvas. It's very important when you do this with your mouse, you are also holding down the Shift key on your keyboard. If we do not hold the Shift key, you have the chance of distorting your image. You can see as soon as I press the Shift key, it brings it back into the correct proportions. You also can pull the photograph to realign it. Now with my image, you can see that there's some extra empty space on the sides when it fits from the top and the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a decision. Do I want to keep extra blank space there, or would I rather make it a little bit larger to fit and then just cut off a little bit of the top and or the bottom? I actually don't particularly care for this little part of the bottom, so I'm going to slide it down to get that out of the frame, and I'm going to have more space that has the open sky. When you have your photograph where you would like, you're going to press Enter on your keyboard. Our next few steps are going to take us the longest amount of time. What we will be doing is getting really close into our photograph, so let me again zoom in, and either using the pen or the line tool, we are going to try and replicate as many of the details in our photograph as possible. This is why it's very important that your image has as few curved lines or people in it. We want to try and stick with something that is very architectural with straight lines. It's going to be the easiest to recreate using the tools we're focusing on today. My suggestion would be to start in one corner. So find a spot that you'd like to focus on first, and we'll work our way up. I prefer the line tool to the pen tool. So to find my line tool, it might be hidden behind another one of your shape tools. I'm going to click and hold on the ellipse tool and select the line tool. Now remember, we need to change the settings along the top menu before we can move on. We do want this first one to be a shape. We want no fill. For my stroke, I am going to keep my color black. Pixel size, let's test it and see if we like how thick it is. See, to me that is too thick, so I'm going to delete that layer, and I'm going to bring my pixel size down to, let's try 10. Let's do another test. That still seems a little bit big to me. I'm going to go down to 7. And then double check that your line alignment is also this middle one. So let's do one more test. Let's see if 7 will work. And I think so. That looks kind of good. You can also see your image or your drawing by hiding your photograph layer. So actually looking at that, I'm going to zoom out just to make sure this is the right size that I want for my image, because I'd rather change my size now than come back later and have to redo some of my lines. I think this might be a little bit too big, so I am actually going to delete these two shapes from my layers menu by dragging them to the trash. You can also right click and select delete. I'm going to make my line weight even smaller. Let's do 5. Let's do one more test. I'm going to hide my image, and that looks much better to me. So depending on your photograph and how many details you have in yours and what you're going for, you may want to play with that line weight a little bit to see what you like. So let's go ahead and zoom back in to this corner. Don't forget you have these slider bars over here on the side. If you'd like to be able to see the lines you're drawing a little bit better, I like to turn the opacity down on my layer just a little bit. This way I can see the darker lines that I'm drawing and the details that I'm tracing without having to try and strain my eyes to see what's what. So let's again select our line tool. Your job now is to try and get as many details as you can from your photograph replicated in your drawing. Every time you are drawing a new line, it is creating a new line file in your layers menu. Remember, the more layers you have, the more information your document has. So you may want to, at the end of every class period, merge those layers down together after putting them in a group to make sure that your file does not get too big so that it slows down the program. So again, to do that, over here in the menu bar, I'm going to scroll all the way down to my very first shape and click on it. And let's scroll all the way back up to the top. Holding down the Shift key on my keyboard, I'm now going to click on that top layer. What that does is it selects all of those layers at one time. I now can right-click and group from layers, and it creates a folder. Now, if I open that folder, all of those shapes are still there. So the last step is to right-click on your group and merge them together. You'll now see that it looks more like a normal layer does. Once you do this, you can erase them, you can move your lines, you can edit them a little bit more. You are not able to erase your lines before they have been merged. You have to do that one step before you're able to do more. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to work on this assignment a little bit, and then I will bring us back together when we are finished with one area and we can go over how to finish up our piece. Alright, so as you can see, I got a good portion of this bottom section complete. There is a really easy way for you to tell how your work is going. Again, on the image layer with your photograph, you can hide it to see what your drawing looks like so far. Now, even in just this small space, if you look at my layers menu, I have over 200 lines. Remember, for this assignment, you really want to focus on detail. The more detail that you are able to draw from your photograph, the more successful your final piece will be. So before I save for today, I'm going to make sure that I am putting all of these shape layers into a group by, again, right-clicking on them once I've selected them all and grouping from my layers, and then right-clicking on my group and merging them together. Now I can also go back and erase any pieces that I might want to as well. You can see over here a little bit of these lines overlapped the final line. So now that I have flattened them together, I can select my eraser tool from my toolbar. I'm going to change the size, come down pretty far, and I can clean those up. If you do not like something, you can always do Control-Z, or you can come back to your history menu and move up to the last spot that you wanted to go back to. So after cleaning up these layers, I then would be done for the day. When you're working, try and make sure that you are zooming in and out to see both the fine details and the overall picture. So I can either, again, use the little magnifying glass and use the plus or minus here, or on my keyboard I can press Control and minus to zoom out, or Control plus to zoom in. You can see down here, I've made some artistic choices that are a little bit different from the photograph. So let me hide my lines. If you take a look at what the actual brick pattern looks like, these bricks are not just square. They have little zigzags on them. For me, I decided that instead of doing those little zigzags, I wanted to recreate that pattern to make it more realistic, but take those out so I was not spending hours and hours and hours of time just on that one detail. So my solution was to make them straight lines on the edges, but I'm still going to be drawing out every brick that I can see. As they get farther and further away, we will lose some details, but you'll want to either zoom in really, really close or try and make up what should be there or what you think might be there. You can also always change your line weight for details that are further away to kind of play with that as well. If you wanted to shade some areas in, like these posters that are hanging on the wall, we can do that using a combination of the rectangular marquee tool, which you can find up here at the top, as well as the paint bucket or gradient tool. So I'm going to first use the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to select one of my boxes. Now you'll see it's actually off a little bit, so let me try something else. Since this photograph is taken in perspective and I'm not seeing this rectangular flat on, it's got a little bit of an angle to the bottom, I'm going to instead use the polygonal lasso tool. And now I can draw around the shape using the corners. And when I connect back to the first point that I drew, you'll see that those little dancing ants appears, and now I have a selection. Next, I'm going to come to my paint bucket or my gradient tool. I'm going to first show you how to use the paint bucket to fill in this space. I am going to select black as my color. I'm going to fill in that space. Now you can leave it just like this, or I'm going to actually lower the opacity of it so it's not quite as bold. You'll notice when I did that, it actually lowered the opacity of everything on the layer. So I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to undo my paint bucket. And before I fill this in, I'm actually going to create a new layer and fill it in. Now when I lower my opacity, only that layer will be affected. Let me select Control D on my keyboard to deselect that area. And I'm going to hide the photograph for a moment. So you can see now that shape is just a gray instead of a solid black. Another option for this, instead of using the paint bucket to fill it in completely, I could use the gradient tool. Now for this, I'm going to select just white for the other side of it. And I'm going to draw here. And you'll see this isn't quite what I wanted. The wrong tool was selected from the very top. I'm going to select this first one where it'll just fade it nice and smooth. I again can lower the opacity to make it a little bit less obvious. Control D on my keyboard to make the dancing ants go away. Let's hide the layer. You'll see in the example in your Canvas document that this student used the gradient and the paint bucket tool to recreate some of the shadows that were in her drawing. She did a very successful job of making some of those pieces that were a little flat when it was just solid black and white lines look more three-dimensional and more realistic. So that is an option, but that would be an additional detail that you could add, but it is not required. Back in Photoshop, if you decide that you do not like the gradient because it's on a separate layer, I can always just drag it and drop it in the trash can and delete it like it never happened. When you are completely done drawing your photograph, so obviously I still have more to do, you will either hide or delete your photograph layer. When you turn in, we won't see the actual photograph that you worked from. So any of those artistic choices that you choose to do, like how I was changing the pattern of the bricks or anything that you do decide to leave out or add in, your viewer won't know because they won't be able to see your original. So you will hide or delete the layer with your photograph in it. Then you will come up to the top and make sure to save your file. Save it as a PSD in your drive and also save as a JPEG. So again, when you save as a JPEG, you can keep the file name the same, but your save as type, you're going to change from a Photoshop document to JPEG. Do note that there are 3 different JPEG options. We want just the first one that's listed, just JPEG, not a JPEG 2000 or a JPEG stereo. When you get this box, you can go ahead and click OK, and now you have it saved both as a Photoshop document and a JPEG. The JPEG will be what you are turning into Canvas. You do want to have that final Photoshop document or PSD saved in case you need to go back and make any edits or changes.